All right. Well, welcome everybody. It's so good to be here with you on this Friday. This has been a topic that we have been focusing on quite a bit over the last 3 months, and for a lot of good reasons. There's been a lot going on in this world today, this year, not today. Sometimes it feels like a day. Sometimes it feels like about 5 years. I'm not really sure sometimes. But today's topic is about building resilience, and our objective today is to improve our ability to face adversity head on. All right, awesome. So here's our roadmap for today. This is going to be a fast and furious session. This is usually a 4 or 6 hour type workshop or program that we run with clients. Part one is we're going to define resilience. We're going to talk about what it is, and we're going to talk about why it's important both personally and professionally. Part two, we're going to talk about a model that we created around resilience. It's called the Resil model. And there's 4 key choices that we have found through our research and through our experience that resilient people make. So we're going to explore that model today in this conversation. And then we're going to spend some time envisioning the future as if it's already here, and about the 4 choices that you'll be making over the next 6, 12, 18 months in your life. In your chat box is a resilience toolkit / handout. So feel free to download that handout. I will refer to some of the questions in this conversation today. So you can find that handout again inside of your chat box, and feel free to use that throughout the conversation today. All right, let's get started. We have all been through so much in the last 6, 9 months. For me, the defining date was March 9th. I was supposed to fly out to Orlando, Florida to work with about 65 leaders from a tech company in Minneapolis. And we got a call from the CEO about the morning of November 9th that said, no, we're not flying. And that was the day when this whole COVID thing really kind of hit home and started to become real for me. And it was really the first time in my life, certainly, that I've seen empty shelves on stores and people clamoring for things like toilet paper and other items that were just like unbelievable. But part of what it also showed me is the suffering that so many people have been through over the last 6 or 9 months, to the likes that I've never seen in the past. And this whole concept of social distancing that's come up, it's been the opposite of what's our most deepest and important human need of connecting with people. And we've all found ourselves in various situations working from home. I know as I look through the doors in my home office here, my 7-year-old is, sometimes he's in gym class, and just can't even imagine teaching a first grader online. But we find ourselves balancing so many personal things that we haven't had to maybe balance at the level and intensity that we've had in this environment, from kids at home to homeschooling, and maybe elderly parents or people that you're also responsible taking care of. And we've seen such a divisive political environment, not just in the United States, but as a global trend. And we're still going through that. And for folks that are in Boulder and other parts of Colorado, and certainly Oregon and California, and we've seen a variety of different climate events that have just layered onto the level of stress that people are feeling. And then, of course, there are the COVID cuts. My wife has become my number one barber here over the last 7 or 8 months. And I used to have hair before this whole thing began. And now we're doing it at home. So there's been a lot going on. What are the words that describe how you feel today? What are some words that describe what emotions you might have been experiencing here over the last, 3, 6 months? Type that in your chat box. Challenged. What else comes up? Worried. Hopeful, freedom, stretched, frustration, fatigued. Yeah, there's what we're finding is we've asked this question probably a dozen times, tired, at least in the last 30 to 60 days. We're seeing really a mix of emotion here, this sense of overwhelm or exhaustion, a sense of people being tired or worried or anxious. And then it's also coupled with a different emotion of hope and freedom and a sense of looking forward to something that might be coming. There's some interesting data that's come out. Some of you may have seen this or been tracking this, especially in your roles in HR and across different corporate environments. The U.S. Census Bureau has been surveying the United States population over the last several months, just about their mental health and their well-being. And the percentage of people that have been feeling down, depressed, or hopeless, the numbers have been rising. This data is from September of 2020, and Dr. David Palmiter shared this data with me in a podcast interview back in October. 52% of the population is feeling down, depressed, or hopeless at least several days a week. 21% feeling down, depressed, or hopeless more than half the time. And they also have a question on their survey about the frequency of people feeling nervous, anxious, or on edge. 63% of the population feeling that way at least several days a week, and 30% more than half of the time. Now, why would I be sharing this data with you in this masterclass today? Why would I share this information with you? Feel free to take yourself off mute and respond to that.
I think from my perspective, Sal, it's to help us understand that it's okay to feel that way. And we're not alone. It's often very difficult for any of us to admit any of these feelings. Certainly from my perspective, it has been, but it's creating that comfort zone, I think.
Yeah, Paul, that's absolutely a big part of this, which is it's normal to, have these feelings. It's normal to know that there might be some anxiety or some nervousness or maybe even depression. There's a sense of calm, I think, when people know that they're not alone in this. Why else would I be sharing this data?
Hey, Sal, I think the thing that jumps out at me is that our interactions with others, even if we're feeling okay, maybe they're not. As well.
Yeah, Vaughn, it's a really great point. And so as leaders in organizations, we also have to know, number one, we're not immune to this process, but other people are going through this process too. And some of you have probably seen some of the work by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, which is a loss in a grieving model. And we've taken that model and we've modified it a bit and we flipped it up. The usual model is kind of, you might remember, it sinks down into sort of a valley of despair and then it ultimately rises up. And we've taken that and flipped it to become more of a mountain. But people go through a normal cycle when it comes to loss or grieving. And there's so much that has changed. And at a minimum, there's a lot of perceived loss in the way life was, a lot of real loss in the way life was from so many dimensions at work and at home. But the change keeps on coming. People aren't just going through this because of one event. There are multiple events that are happening, not just on the personal side, not just all of the things that I mentioned earlier, but there's the complexity of the business. There's the pace of the business. There's a sense of relentlessness that at least we're hearing from our clients. So yeah, I show the data to let you know that A, you're not alone, but B, we also have to understand what our people are going through. And they're going through some really challenging times, as you know. What are some of the factors that are weighing most on your mind as you think about this environment today? I'm gonna pull up a very quick poll here. And what are some of the things that are weighing on your mind? Change at work? Personal challenges like homeschooling or dealing and supporting elderly parents, maybe even a health concern that you might be dealing with, economic uncertainty, stress related to COVID, weather events like fire, flood, other occurrences. What is most stressful or most on your mind today? Take a moment to respond to that poll. We've heard from 1 out of 7 people. 42% are now in. What's most stressful to you or on your mind most today? Changes at work, personal challenges, economic uncertainty, stress related to COVID, weather events. Maybe there's some other events that are occurring or other experiences that are happening for you right now. Close the poll here in about 4 or 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. All right. So we had a few people respond to the poll. Here's what showed up. We're obviously missing some things in terms of what's happening and what might be on people's mind the most. There's a lot going on. There's a lot that's happening today. And part of what will bridge us, if you will, from where we are today, this combination of this overwhelm and the stress and the anxiety and these mixed emotions that we might be feeling, and to some better future state, is resilience. And there's some interesting data that came out of the Boston Consulting Group, and they wrote an article about 18 months ago about resilience, and not about resilience specifically, but about a future downturn. So in 2018, this article talked about the next downturn is likely to be accompanied by very high levels of uncertainty along a number of different dimensions. And in order to perform well in these unpredictable conditions, leaders must build resilience in their businesses. And so there are a lot of really interesting information in that article about how and where and when to build resilience. But part of the bridge from where we are today to that ideal future state is building resilience, both within us internally as people, as leaders, as human beings, but also within our organizations. And so let's talk about resilience. What does resilience mean to you? In your chat box, how would you define resilience? You think about resilience. What does it mean to you? What comes up? Job security for the team, helping them understand. We will work with them as they manage through their own stresses. Thanks, Paul. What else? What else? How would you define resilience? Stepping into uncertainty and adversity with courage, adapting to change. Thanks, Amy. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the way that we think about resilience is it's really the capacity to face adversity head on and to bounce back stronger. It's not just a word. It's the glue that really will help us get us from where we are today to where we want to be in the future. But it's really about, to me, not just getting through something, not just kind of plowing through something. It's not just about grit. Holly, I love your definition here, not giving up no matter what is going around you. To us, it's also about coming out of this thing stronger. And if you think about resilience, there's some benefits to resilience, both on the home front as well as in our professional lives. If you had to guess and think about why is resilience at home, what are some of the benefits that we might see from people that have a strong sense of resilience? Come off of mute. Love to hear some responses from you. Why is resilience important at home? What's your take?
Sal, I think it would cost me an arm and a leg if I didn't figure out how to fix some things at home, and just hired everyone else to do it. So I have to be resilient and learn how to do things myself.
Sure, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So that ability to, move through and then be able to persevere and take on some things yourself. Absolutely. Why else is resilience? Amy, how about you?
Yeah, I just think there's a lot to juggle right now. I've sort of coined this little phrase called the juggle is real.
Yeah.
I have 3 kids at home, all different school ages. So at this point, if we don't adapt and learn to navigate this, then it's sink or swim, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And, what Amy didn't tell you also is that she's balancing her work as a professional too, full time. And so there's a lot happening. Here's what we know about resilience from a research standpoint. People with strong or high levels, high capacity for resilience, we see improved learning and academic achievement. We see fewer absences from work and from school, reduced risk-taking behaviors, so things that are unhealthy when it comes to coping mechanisms, more involvement in community and with family, and lower rates of mortality and increased physical health. And the benefits of higher levels of resilience, we see sort of correlated results. By the way, I'm laughing because my son is over there right now doing jumping jacks or something. He's in gym class. Benefits of resilience at work. Number one, improved learning. And so if you think about all of the things that have happened this year, there's no playbook on how to deal with COVID. Part of what we have to be able to do as leaders is learn as we're going, experiment, learn, and then pivot the business. So the improved learning is really critical towards sustainability and success in this environment. Lower absenteeism from work due to sickness. Resilient organizations tend to be more inclusive. That diversity becomes a source for innovation. And resilient organizations tend to be better equipped to adopt an agile approach to their work. So there's a lot of benefits here of developing resilience, both personally as well as professionally. I want to make a couple of key points because in our normal workshop environment, we'll spend some time thinking about events or experiences or setbacks that you have worked through already in your life. We've all been through these events, the trauma, the suffering, the unexpected events that come up. And this isn't about ignoring those events, but part of who you are today, part of why you are the person you are is because of those experiences that you've had. And you are a stronger person because of those experiences. We also know that our experience in any time there's an unexpected event is influenced by 3 critical factors. Number 1, the duration of the event. Number 2, the intensity of the event. And number 3, the controllability. So if you think about COVID as one example of an unexpected event, has COVID been longer or shorter than what you originally expected? Thumbs up if it's longer, thumbs down if it's shorter. Yeah, it's been longer. Has it been more intense or less intense than what you may have expected earlier this year? Yeah, thumbs up. Absolutely, Jan and Amy and Kirk. And then controllability. How much control have you had over this COVID environment? A lot of control or little? Yeah. So there's this element of these factors that are also influencing our experience. And maybe the most important point about resilience here is that what we found in our work, both with clients, anecdotally and through research, is that resilient people focus on what they can control. And there's a lot of things that we cannot control in this world today. Just turn on the news. In fact, maybe don't turn on the news to reduce the level of stress. But anytime there is an unexpected event, we can't control the nature of that event. We can't control what other people are doing. We can't control the geopolitical environment, but there are a number of things that we can control. And these are the things that resilient people tend to focus on. Number 1, what is our focus? What are the words that we use? What do we think about? What do we spend time and energy on? Number 2, our beliefs. What's the meaning that we make from an experience? What do we believe about ourselves and others? Number 3, we can control how we act. And number 4, what we learn. And so that's what we're going to focus on here for the remainder of this masterclass today. And those controllable components are really what make up the 4 choices of our Resil model. And those four choices are: number one, how will you refocus? When an unexpected event comes up, what is it that you're going to focus on and put your energy toward? Number two, how will you embrace a meaningful and an empowering mindset? Number three, how will you strategize and implement? In other words, what are you going to do? What are the actions that you're going to take? Are they healthy or unhealthy? And number four, how will you learn? So these are the four components of our Resil model, and really the focus here for the next 20 or 30 minutes of our time together. So the first focus area here, the first choice is, how will you refocus? And oftentimes what happens when an unexpected event comes up is our million-year-old mind takes over, right? And our mind, our brain is geared toward safety. It's geared toward keeping us safe and keeping us away from threat. And so it's not uncommon for us to move toward a fight, flight, or freeze environment. And our brain is trained to help us stay alive and be safe. And there's a negativity bias that is an evolutionary function that's sort of built into our system. And the negativity bias says this: the consequences of ignoring positive information are typically less severe compared to the consequences of ignoring negative or threatening information. And so any kind of unexpected event, any kind of change can trigger that threat, that sense of threat, and trigger that negativity bias. And so what happens is we often will distort or exaggerate some information, or we might even avoid some information. And so part of this first step is really about thinking of, what are the facts? What are we going to refocus on? What are we going to actually hold as truth? It's easy to exaggerate a situation. It's easy to also, at the other end, sugarcoat or avoid a situation. This first step is really about just understanding, coming to grips with what the facts are without the exaggeration, but also without the avoidance. And so take a moment to identify a current challenging situation. I want you to think about something here that you can use throughout these four choices throughout the rest of our program today. And it could be something on the personal side. It could be dealing with the 3 kids at home. It could be trying to juggle the homeschooling or supporting an elderly person, or maybe there's a health concern or something else that might be happening in your personal life. It could also be something related to the workplace. Maybe there's an acquisition that you've been through, or a tough specific situation in the industry, given the economic uncertainty today. What's a current challenging situation that you're going through today? And I want you to reflect on 3 questions. And these 3 questions, if you're following along on the handouts, are on page 3. And the 3 questions are: what are the actual facts of the situation? Number 2, where might you be distorting or exaggerating the current situation? And number 3, the opposite, where might you be sugarcoating or avoiding the truth? Number 1, what are the facts of the situation? Number 2, where might you be distorting or exaggerating the situation? Number 3, where are you sugarcoating or avoiding the truth? So I'd love to hear from you. What's your tendency when an unexpected event comes up? What do you tend to do? How do you tend to react? Feel free to either type it in the chat box or jump in. What is your tendency to tend to be? Do you just see things factually as they are? Have ultra clear objectivity? Or do you tend to distort things and exaggerate, or do you tend to avoid things? Who's got a response?
Sal?
Yes, Jan.
I would say that I tend to react emotionally based on what my triggers are. what things I hold to be, sacred, etc. And then I step back and say, okay, so what's really going on here? So that immediate is different from when my head clicks in and says, no, you got to step back and look at the facts.
Yeah. And Jen, that's exactly what this first step is about, which is refocusing and just looking at things objectively without exaggerating it, but also without avoiding. And we had a comment in the chat box, would sound similar, Jan, to what your response was, which is this person has a momentary emotive reaction and then jumps into action. So really interesting to see where her natural tendencies are. So that's choice number one. How are you going to refocus? Choice number two is highly related to choice number one. Choice number two is really about the mindset, the narrative, the beliefs, the stories that you tell yourself. And it's how will you embrace an empowering mindset? So Jan, to your point, we often have this emotional reaction at first, and then over time it becomes easier to maybe step back and look at things differently. But there's a theory in psychology called the cognitive appraisal theory. And it simply says this, and I'll tell you what it simply means. Interpretations or appraisals of events rather than the events themselves are what cause emotions. And so to me, what that means is two people can have the same exact experience, but have an entirely different meaning or attach an entirely different meaning to that experience. And by the way, that meaning that we attach to any experience is within our control. It's a choice that we make. So a couple of examples. Maybe it's a relationship and two people have just broken up and one person sees that as a loss or it happened because of me, and somebody else can have a completely different experience. This creates new possibilities, or there are new opportunities on the horizon. Maybe something smaller in impact. You send a text to your friend who hasn't responded to you, and you can appraise that event or attach a meaning that the person's mad at you, or maybe he or she's doing something that's fun without you. Well, somebody else might look at it completely differently and just give it a different meaning. He's busy or doing something else that's important in his or her life. A personal example, my 7-year-old son, Eli, who I mentioned earlier, is currently in online learning. Well, we started out with online learning, and then the kids went back to school for about 8 weeks, and now they're back to online learning. But that first day of school, when they were going back to in-person learning, it was the morning of, we were getting ready to walk Eli to school, and my wife was explaining what was in his backpack, and they had to, part of the rules where they had to pack several masks, and she was showing him how to use the mask. And I was looking at him and I could not help but to notice this sense of overwhelming sadness that came over me as I was looking at my 7-year-old son, who now has to wear this mask as he's going to school. And as I looked at him a little bit more closely, I couldn't help to notice just this huge smile that was on his face. This smile, this beaming flame of joy. He just couldn't wait to get back to school. Here we are having the same exact experience, attaching two totally and completely different meanings to the same experience. And so the bottom line is this. Choice number two is really about the meaning that we decide to attach to an experience. Now, it doesn't mean that the experience that you've had or that you're having isn't traumatic or hasn't caused a lot of pain or suffering, but we get to choose how we decide what that experience means to us. And what we find is that highly resilient people tend to choose a meaning or an experience that is empowering and enables them to get through that unexpected event. And I think, this speaks back to some of what you all have brought up, which is oftentimes what happens is an event happens, some unexpected experience, event, challenge, setback, and we have this automatic thought. And when that automatic thought goes unchecked, we can have a reaction. So there's a distinction here between reacting and responding. And if we just have a reaction, oftentimes that reaction can be destructive. It can be destructive to ourselves. It can be destructive to a relationship or to a conversation that we might be having with somebody else. But when we challenge that automatic thought, we can create a response. And this is directly from cognitive behavioral therapy. I know many of you have probably seen this, which is we have an event and then there's an automatic thought. And remember, our mind is geared towards survival. The concept of having automatic thoughts happens to all of us. Those thoughts are not your thoughts. The mind is just the mind. It's not even your mind. Most of the time, that narrative, that story that plays in our minds, none of those thoughts are original. They're just automatic. And so we can change that reaction to a response when we challenge the automatic thought. And we can challenge the automatic thought through some questions. Number one, is that thought true? Number two, how might I be exaggerating that thought? And number three is the reset or the reframe question, which is, how can I see it differently? Now, I think it also helps to change your physiology when you see that or hear that thought come across, that narrative. Move your body, make a radical movement, take a walk, ask yourself these questions. Is it true? How am I exaggerating? And how can I reframe it? How can I see this experience differently? When we do that, we can help change the meaning of what we're experiencing. We can ask different questions and come up with a different truth about what's happening. So we're not going to do a breakout because we've got a small group here today, but I'd love to hear maybe some of the automatic thoughts that come up for you when you think about this challenge that you're facing, and what's a different way that you can see it differently, or that you can reframe that automatic thought. Who's got a response? What's an automatic thought that comes up for you? And what's a different way of seeing the perspective that you're in? Vaughn, is that you? I think I can see you coming off mute.
Yeah, I guess I'm just thinking because it's annual review time. And so, so they always say feedback is a gift, and yet sometimes feedback puts us in a defensive mode. That's kind of where my head went on that.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really great point. And so how could that be reframed, Vaughn? How could you or somebody else see that differently?
Well, I think you could make it more comfortable to receive the feedback up front. Be very upfront that we should dig below the surface, kind of thing. Mm-hmm. That's why I went up mute, but then I paused because I didn't really know I think it's just about going deeper, I guess, making more of a connection.
Yeah, that's fair. And I think receiving feedback at work, it really can trigger that automatic reaction, that automatic thought and the automatic reaction, that response. And it's a great example of where someone could be more resilient. They could see the feedback or hear the feedback differently that they're getting from a peer, from a manager, or maybe from someone who works for them. Kirk, I think you were going to say something.
Yeah, I think it's along the same lines, especially when I receive maybe positive feedback or some sort of praise. I instantly kind of self-doubt what's the intent behind the praise, what's the intent behind, what do they need from me next, mm-hmm. right? Why am I getting this compliment? And that's challenging to reframe from. So. Yeah,
exactly. So go back to these three questions, right? It's easy to, when that automatic thought goes unchecked, it's easy to create a story or narrative that just frankly might not even be true. So when you've got that narrative that says, why is that person giving me positive feedback? What are they up to? Maybe they're just trying to butter me up. Well, is that true? Probably not. How could I be exaggerating the situation? How could I see it differently? It will completely change your perspective, but that automatic thought, the key here is that automatic thought has to be challenged. And adding some change in your physiology can also add a change in how you respond. So, challenge or choice number one is really, how are you going to refocus? Choice number two is, what's the empowering meaning that you're going to give to the experience that you're going through? We're not avoiding or trying to ignore the pain or the trauma or the suffering, but what's the meaning that you're going to attach to whatever it is that you're going through, whether it's feedback at work or something maybe more traumatic in your personal life? Question number three, or choice number three, is how will you strategize and implement? And really, this is about action. And what I've found with so many leaders, we just ran a similar workshop like this yesterday with about 65 people. And this was the choice that was easiest for them. And we just find that people are so action oriented in the workplace, especially high performing leaders. And so people will oftentimes just move to action as opposed to thinking about their mindsets and their beliefs. But how will you strategize and implement? And really, much of this is really about the choices that you make in terms of how you cope with whatever experience or unexpected event that you're facing. And so we can take healthy action. We can also cope with things in an unhealthy way. And I'd love to hear from you. In your chat box, what would be an example of an unhealthy way to cope with an unexpected event or a setback? In your chat box, what's an unhealthy way that people or you might cope with a unexpected event or setback? To dismiss it. Yeah, there's an element of either avoidance, Amy says, to ignore it, or just completely ignoring something. Absolutely. Haley, mentally checking out and avoiding decisions or actions. Hostility, sure. Sort of the opposite of the avoidance is the fighting back, freezing and avoiding, retreating. Yeah. How about healthy ways? How might you deal with a setback in a healthy way? In your chat box, what would you say is a healthy strategy or way to deal with a challenge or setback? Exercise. Breathe deeply. Without a doubt. Meditation or breathing techniques. It's no wonder why there's actually an app on my Apple Watch in the lower right-hand corner. There's a lot of research between the connection of meditation, breathing, mindfulness, and stress relief and health. Thinking positively, moving forward, accepting the facts, dealing with this situation as we and finding a way and find a reward. So deal with the situation as we and find a reward. Yeah, absolutely. So in your handouts, we've got a number of strategies. This is a tool that we created just to help you think about what are some of the patterns you're noticing in your own behavior. So there's three circles here to look at. Let me orient you for a moment. In the middle are really the four elements or the four choices of the Brazil model. What are you focusing on? What's your mindset? What are the actions you'll take? And what will you learn? And then in the blue circle, there are some healthy strategies for coping with an unexpected event. So for example, some of you mentioned this, focusing on facts, or maybe looking for what's right instead of always looking for what's wrong, having an intentional response, or maybe in the mindset area, interpreting self or interrupting self-defeating patterns, or optimism or gratitude, or strategizing and taking experiments and self-awareness. These are all very healthy ways of dealing with an unexpected event. And then in the red circle, in the outer circle, are unhealthy coping mechanisms, the rumination, the negativity, looking for what's wrong all the time, blame. Someone mentioned that in the chat box earlier. Social withdrawal. We heard about ignoring things and avoiding situations. So there's this element of unhealthy coping mechanisms that we might find ourselves partaking in. Now, if you go back to the research that I mentioned earlier about resilient people, and even some of the information that was in that Boston Consulting Group article, people that are higher, have higher levels of capacity and resilient skills, they tend to use healthier coping mechanisms as they're going through any challenge, whether it's something you're rebuilding in your house or responding to feedback or something in your personal life. So back to the challenge that you've been considering in your own life. My question for you is, what healthy coping strategies are you using, or maybe have you used? And then what pushes you from using healthy coping strategies to unhealthy coping strategies? Let's open it up for a little bit of discussion around this. What's a healthy coping strategy that you're using in that challenge? And what pushes you to go from an unhealthy coping strategy to from a healthy coping strategy to an unhealthy coping strategy?
Sal, it's Paul. I think one of the healthy coping strategies that I'm using personally is to try and find a way to use it in a team environment as also a way to coach and mentor. So I'm trying to find a way to include others and to help at a time where developing others is pretty challenging, to try and use some of those situations to develop other people.
Yeah, it's interesting, Paul, and part of what we're noticing in 360 data, so 360 feedback data, is leaders are consistently across clients, across gender, across geography, they're consistently scoring lower in mentoring and coaching competencies right now. So there's something here that I think is really key, and putting an emphasis on that is certainly a very healthy way at the team level. Other strategies. What other strategies are you using that are healthy coping mechanisms, and what might push you to go from healthy to unhealthy? Kirk, how about you?
It's real easy to take ownership, especially if you can, knock it out of the park or the answer, but it's a lot easier to blame others if you're not sure, or if you're less confident in what you're sharing. It's easier to spread. Maybe it's just you and someone else, but you share the blame, but you take some of the glory when it's the easy stuff.
Yep. Yeah. Great. Thanks. Any others? What other healthy or unhealthy coping strategies have come up for you, whether it's in regards to that challenge that you're working on, or maybe something else that's occurring right now?
Sal, I'll go back to, since we're all working from home, it's easy to go take a walk.
Yeah. Excellent. Yeah. And there's an element, Vaughn, that we've noticed certainly with our clients of this unrelenting pace where Zoom calls are all stacked up. And so finding those ways, even if it's a 5 or a 7 or a 10-minute walk, to just get out and take a break. Jan mentioned recommitting to morning, evening wellness routines. Absolutely. So these are all healthy ways, obviously, to deal with any setback that you might be experiencing. The fourth choice is really about how will you learn. So choice number 1 was, what are you going to refocus on? The facts versus the avoidance, the facts versus the distortion. Choice number 2 was, what's the empowering mindset that you're going to really make a choice around? Removing the narratives and the automatic thoughts that are disempowering, but that aren't even your thoughts. Choice number 3 was, what are the healthy choices that you're going to make versus the unhealthy? What are those actions that you're going to take? Choice number 4 is, what are you going to learn? I think this is a really important choice. And in many ways, what we found is that people tend to be more fulfilled in life when they see themselves progressing, when they see some evolution and growth that's happening in their life. When that's absent, that's when we see lower levels of engagement, lower levels of fulfillment. We see more attrition, we see more turnover, and we see less productivity. So how will you learn? And if we see life as happening for us as opposed to us, we're much more likely to evolve and grow and learn from any given experience and setback. This is a tool that we use. It's called the After Action Assessment Model. It's a very simple tool that you can use at any point in time to really inspire and develop some learning from any experience, whether it's in the middle of a meeting or at the end of some milestone in the workplace, or maybe a project that your team completed. And it's a model that was originally developed by the US military to debrief missions. So it's 4 simple questions. And by the way, these are great coaching questions. The first 2 questions we spend 30% of our time on. What did we intend to do? And what actually happened? These are important questions to pull apart, because the gap between what we intended to do and what's actually happening is where the learning comes from. So those are the first 2 questions. The second 2 questions in this model is, what did you learn and what's next? And so we spend 70% of our time thinking about this. I've found that software developers that follow agile methodologies and lean methodologies tend to be really good at this. What you intend to do, what actually happened, where's the gap, what did you learn, and what's next? So that is the 4th choice in the model. Number 1, what are you going to refocus on? Number 2, what's the meaning you're going to give to the event? Number 3, what actions will you take? How are you going to strategize and implement? And number 4, how will you learn throughout that experience? So I want to invite you to participate in one quick event. Let's see if we can pull this together. And to do that, I'd ask everybody to stand up wherever you are, unless you're driving a car. Just take a moment and stand up. And as you stand up, I want you to think about that challenging event or that challenging experience that you thought about and used for each of these 4 questions and these 4 choices. Now, turn to your right. Your right represents the future. It represents where we are headed. Imagine looking out 3 months, 6 months, 12 months from now. Take a step forward. That forward step represents 3 months. It represents 4 months, 5 months from now. Take another step forward, either physically or metaphorically here. You're now 6 months into the future, and one final step forward. You're now 12 months into the future. And now I want you to turn around and look back on the path that you've just walked. Look back on the 3 and the 6 and the 9 months, the place where you've come from, and to imagine that you have stepped into your ideal self. You've made the choices that resilient people make. You've decided to refocus on the facts without the exaggeration or the avoidance. You've decided to give your experience a meaningful and empowering reason for being and belief. And you've decided to take healthy actions and steps to move forward. And finally, you've decided that this experience is happening for you and not to you, and you are learning and growing and evolving as a human being. And with that in mind, take a moment to think about one action that you're going to take as a result of that ideal self and that empowering future. Take a moment to think about that now. And when you're ready, feel free to sit back down and write about that action that you'll take. All right. Well, I want to thank you all for being here with me today. I know how busy everybody is. There's a lot going on in our world. And I think if we all take time to focus on these 4 choices, we'll live with life with much intention and passion and purpose. Hey, check out our blog and our Future of Leadership podcast page. We've got a number of resources to support you and your people and your leaders through this time. Change the way you think, change the way you lead, change the way you align. We've got tools on leading through crisis. We've got tools on the emotions and emotional support. We've got tools on strategic planning. So as we start to prepare for 2020 or 2021, I should say, draw upon some of those tools to help create a healthy, aligned, and more human workplace. I hope you'll join me on January 8th, the first Friday of January. We're going to be running a 90-minute goal setting workshop. We know that resilient people have goals. They have something to move toward. That's going to be hopefully a fun and interactive session together to get us set up for success in 2021. So thanks everybody for joining me today. And I look forward to staying in touch. Reach out if there's anything I can support you with. Take care.